For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Chris Younger. Chris is a graduate of Miami University and Harvard Law School and has also studied at the London School of Economics. Chris is the author of the book Harvest, the definitive guide to selling your company. Chris co-founded several companies including Expanets, which was acquired by Avaya, and now Classics Partners, an investment banking company. Stay tuned for my conversation with Chris where he shares practical wisdom for entrepreneurs of building a sellable business.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey Chris, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Well, thanks for having me, Samuel, and thanks for doing what you guys do for entrepreneurs. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, obviously every entrepreneur has a story of how they overcame obstacles to become an entrepreneur. I'm sure you have something very exciting to share. So can you share with our audience what's your story of becoming an entrepreneur?
So, I was fortunate. I had sold a prior company, and so had some resources. But I was also fortunate because I had a business partner to go into business with. David Tolson was my business partner, still is. And, I had, as I mentioned, I'd sold a communications company and tried to retire for a couple of years. And my wife decided that I needed a hobby. And so David and I started the investment bank. And it was, we started it at the absolute worst time. We started the investment bank in 2005, kind of mid 2005. And, in this business, number one, it takes a while to get a client, and then it takes a while to close the deal. So I don't think we closed our first deal until 2008, and then the recession hit. And so 2009 was pretty lean, and then, started to pick back up in 2010. But it was, it was 3 or 4 years of ramen noodles, I think, or at least the equivalent thereof for David and myself. And it was, it was fun though. We love working with entrepreneurs, and so it didn't feel like work, and we enjoyed getting the business off the ground, and we got busier and busier, and fortunately we were able to hire some really good people, a lot smarter than we are.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because obviously we got into the business in 2006, not even knowing, being very naive about the economy and where the country as a whole was headed, and jumped into it. And now almost 15 years later, we're here, right? And we saw one more recession almost take place during that career ourselves. So obviously you had a pretty successful exit, and then you decided to take some time off, and then you're back at it again. And I see this pattern with a lot of entrepreneurs that I've interviewed. So what is that? Why? What's the driving factor behind why you keep doing what you love to do?
When we sold the communications business, that was a roll-up. So I was the deal guy and then the president of that business, and we had acquired 27 companies. And so one of the things that I took from that experience was just how much fun it is to work with entrepreneurs. The folks that we bought businesses from, salt of the earth, great people, had built really nice companies. I enjoyed being around them. And so when we started the investment bank, we were very intentional around, our target client was working with entrepreneurs. And, selfishly, it's a lot of fun to work with entrepreneurs. But also our firm's mission is to enable the entrepreneurial spirit. And the reason why we think that's so important is, I live in Colorado, and most of the economic growth, most of the hiring, is done by small to mid-sized businesses. And so, we view our role as if we can help them, whether it's raising money or selling when the time comes, and make their journey rewarding for them as an entrepreneur, then we feel like we've done our job. And it's like I said, and the byproduct is we get to work with really cool people every day. And it's that's our why. And I think for most entrepreneurs, I'm 54 today. I was 39, 40 when we started the business, and that's obviously, as I learned, way too young to retire. But I also think that most people, when you wake up, you need purpose, right? You have to have a reason to get after it. And for us, that was the investment bank, and it's just been a lot of fun.
That's awesome because I think your first business actually taught you a lot about mergers and acquisitions. So it was a natural progression for you to go into another business where you're helping other people do what you were doing in that career. So basically, obviously, you learned a bunch of lessons in the process of building this second venture. What is the biggest lesson you learned in the process of building this company? Apart from don't start it when it's a recession.
During the recession, we've got a lot of lessons. I think and this is one that my business partner talks about quite a bit, which is if you do right by your clients, they're going to do right by you. Almost 100% of our business just comes from referrals, right? Folks that have worked with us or know us, and refer us to somebody else. And so, we're very passionate about making sure you do the right thing for the clients. And that's not just providing great service, but in our world, in the investment banking business, it can be very transactional. Investment banks get paid most of their fee right when the deal closes. And so there's a natural kind of drive or urge for the investment banker to push a deal. And we've tried very, very hard. If we didn't think the deal was the right thing for the client, or we felt like the deal was going in a direction that was not going to benefit the client, our candid advice to the client was, let's pull back. They have a great business, and that's worked really well. And I think that's true, quite frankly, certainly for any service business is, just take great care of your clients. So that's probably the biggest lesson. The other ones, as you might expect, revolve around make sure you surround yourself with great people, your business partners, your team. We've been really, really fortunate. We've got just fantastic people that, have agreed to come and, share this part of our journey with us.
So obviously part of your business is helping other entrepreneurs, scale and grow and sell their businesses. And what are some of the common characteristics that you've seen in these entrepreneurs, especially those successful ones you've helped exit?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been doing a project where I've been interviewing some of our CEOs or business owners that have, been through the process of starting a business, growing it and then selling it, and then talking to them about life, after closing. And so, some of the common traits that you might expect with entrepreneurs, just an absolute conviction and commitment to making their business successful. I've heard from more than one of the folks that I've talked to, there's, and I think this is true for a lot of entrepreneurs, a really deep-seated fear of failure. They absolutely were going to do anything that they needed to do to make sure that their business didn't fail. And, I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we get a lot of our kind of personal satisfaction and we start to identify with our businesses. And so I think most people can understand that just sheer perseverance. And, all of these business owners had been through near-death experiences with their business, right? Where things weren't looking too good, and but they just worked their way through it. The level of ingenuity and the level of kind of just get after it that you see in these entrepreneurs, it's truly amazing. There are some just incredible stories that we've had the chance to hear, but also participate in, at least in their later stages.
Yeah, that's interesting that you share that, because I've had a couple of those entrepreneurs that I've interviewed as well. Some of them shared, very embarrassing stories of raising so much capital and just burning it through, and essentially just having to humble themselves and just say, hey, you know what? I got to become a sales guy now because I got to figure out how to go sell, make money back, and prove that this idea works. Or, basically they had to work hard, right? And not necessarily just kind of, the idea failed, it wasn't my money, let me go on, right? So I think that stamina of just keep doing it because they trust that vision and they had that dream and they wanted to make it successful, regardless of what the outcome was from the initial try.
No, I think that's exactly right. And it's, I've always said, I think maybe 1% of the population are psychologically equipped to be an entrepreneur. And again, when you watch what entrepreneurs have to go through from, again, just the stress of owning a business, right? And being responsible for, the business's success and all the people that work with you, and you're responsible for them and their families. It's a great deal of pressure. And as anyone in business knows, things don't always go well, right? There are a lot of challenges, and so to take on that burden again, it takes a really unique set of kind of personality traits.
Most certainly, and I think grass is always greener on the other side. People, observe the entrepreneur's lifestyle, and they see all the Instagram photos and they want that, but then only when they get into it for the first time they realize how hard it is. But obviously, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it's funny because a lot of business owners come to us, and they're ready to sell their business, but they'd like to sell their business to their management team. And what's interesting is, if you think about that management team, most of them were hired, right? They were employees and they were hired to work in the business. And I think it's noble, right, for the business owner to want to transition the business to their team. But when you sit down with that management team and you explain to them, hey, in order to complete this acquisition of the business from this owner, you're going to have to borrow money. You're going to have to put your assets on the line. You're going to have to personally guarantee this. 9.5 times out of 10, they change their minds. Hey, this doesn't feel like this is quite right for me. And so but it's true, right? You have to have that level of conviction and just absolute confidence and drive. These are 24/7 jobs.
Most certainly, and I think you've mentioned you've had not only the opportunity to help some of these companies exit, and you had the opportunity to go back and interview some of these entrepreneurs. Were there any surprising findings or stories, interesting stories that you can share from that experience?
Oh, there's lots of great stories, and some of my favorite are the ones where, for example, we had a woman who started a business. She was a single mom, and it's funny when you talk to some of these entrepreneurs about the reason that they started their business. A lot of it had to do with they were just trying to fix something in their life, and for her, she was in the insurance game, and she was having to travel quite a bit, and she had 2 young kids, and one of whom was born prematurely, and so she was in the hospital with her son for months. And so she started her business because it was a way that she could work out of her house. And then over time, and she had so many great stories about, again, how she persevered. And then she ended up, we helped her with her last chapter and sold it to a private equity group, and she's continuing to run it. But, you talk about just an indomitable human spirit. She had that. She was dealing with quite a bit and still started this company and was just incredibly successful with it. So, and there are just stories after stories. One of my favorites was, I was talking to one of our entrepreneurs who had started a technology business with his brother, and they ultimately sold that business, but he was telling the story about his dad was an entrepreneur, and so he kind of had this in his blood, and his dad was telling him about when his dad was young, that he would go paint addresses on curbs. He would go to a certain block, he would paint all these addresses, write the address numbers on the curbs, and then he would go house by house and just say, hey, I've done this service for the neighborhood, and would you like to donate? And he was telling his sons, right, our clients, how much money he made doing that. So his Tyler is his name, decided he'd like to go do this, and so he and his brother went to these neighborhoods, and he said when they started knocking on the doors, all these people were really upset with them because they didn't want these curb numbers painted on their curb. And so he walked through the whole story about how they had to adapt and change the marketing message and change how they did it. And they would start with flyers, but it was really fun to hear these stories of, how, their entrepreneurial instincts, started when they were kids. And it's pretty neat.
It's crazy. I mean, you hear about the lemonade stories, and you often think that's just made up. And sometimes I hear these entrepreneurs, they literally had such stories. One person I interviewed recently said that person bought a bunch of miniature golf stuff and then put it in the backyard and brought all the neighborhood kids and started charging them for miniature golf in the backyard. I mean, that's the person running a SaaS company today. And I'm like, man, that's pretty interesting. I mean, you were an entrepreneur at 5 years old trying to make some money on the side.
Yeah, I'm sure they learned a lot, right? It was
exactly.
like Tyler, right? Learning, hey, you better understand your market before you start trying to sell something.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same neighborhood kids, they could have done it, but this person decided, hey, man, I can make use of my backyard and make these people pay for it. And plus, he can pay for all his toys that he wants,
that's
by
perfect.
having somebody else pay for. Obviously, Classics partners have built a virtual assessment tool which allows entrepreneurs to come and take an assessment of their business, which kind of essentially puts a report out that shows all the possible risk factors they need to be focusing on. So why would someone who may not be actively thinking about, and maybe exiting now, should even go through an assessment process and just to see what kind of risk factors they may be faced with?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, CoPilot is a tool that we developed. When we started our investment bank and we were representing companies, one of the things that we found is when we had a client, we were getting ready to take them to market, they had certain issues in their business that we knew were going to degrade value, right? It was going to lower the valuation of that business, and some of those risks might actually prevent a deal from happening. But by the time we got hired, for a lot of those risks, it was too late to do anything about it. And so, what we did is we started working with companies 2 or 3, 4 years ahead of when they were actually going to go to market. And we would interview them and try to uncover, hey, what are those risk factors and what could we do to try to alleviate or mitigate those risks such that when the business went to market, they did better, right? They got more money, the deals were easier and smoother. And so what we did with CoPilot, back to our mission to enable the entrepreneurial spirit, our ability to talk to business owners is not really scalable. But we thought, hey, if we could develop an application that would mimic that interview process and uncover specific risks in businesses, and we could put that into an automated tool that a business owner could fill out a questionnaire. Then we could give them a report. We didn't necessarily need to interview them, but they could start to understand, hey, what areas of exposure do I have in my business? And so, independent of whether you're going to sell your company, clearly, if you're going to sell your company, you kind of want to get the test ahead of time, and CoPilot helps do that. It helps give the owner a sense for what are investors going to think about my business. But regardless of whether you're going to sell, hey, understanding where you might have soft spots in your business or where risk in your business could ultimately damage the business, hey, understanding that and understanding tools about how to mitigate those risks is really important. And that's I would say probably 60 or 70% of the folks that take CoPilot, are not interested in selling anytime soon, but they do want to understand, hey, what is a second set of objective eyes? What do they see in my company?
Yeah, most certainly. I know it's a pretty extensive report, and you guys are giving it away for free, and they can go to Classics Partners or even CoPilotAnalytics.com and take that assessment.
Yeah, no, like I said, back to our mission, we make this available to business owners to take and to understand more about their business. And the report itself will come back with a prioritized list of risks that we've seen, as well as a whole series of strategies for how to mitigate those. And it's a 35 or 40 page report typically.
Yeah, so obviously you've mentioned risk factors, and I think you've mentioned well over 70 some risk factors that typical businesses may need to prioritize and attack, pretty much to increase the company value. But are there any common top 5 that you've seen across the board in terms of what companies usually overlook that affects their company value?
Yeah, what's interesting is, because we've had hundreds of companies take CoPilot, we now actually have a pretty good database of, hey, what are the most common risks? And the number one most common risk, and this will ring true with a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, is, hey, the business is too dependent on that owner or that CEO, meaning maybe the CEO is responsible for most of the sales. Maybe they're responsible for operations, or maybe they're the lead product developer. And whenever that happens, that makes the business risky, right? Because that business owner, if something happens to them, that's going to majorly disrupt, have a significant impact on the business. And so, it's interesting going back to those CEOs that I've been interviewing, when I ask them about the most common regret they have is, I didn't hire my team fast enough, soon enough. I didn't bring on people that could help me scale this business soon enough. Whether it was, I didn't feel like I could afford it, or I felt like no one could do this job as well as I'm doing it. I didn't hire talented people soon enough. And I think that's true in a lot of businesses. And it's, we see that risk factor quite commonly. The other one is, not having kind of adequate diversity in your revenue stream, whether that's, diversity in customer base, diversity in product set, diversity in projects. If you've got too much of your revenues tied up in a particular project, in a particular customer, in a particular product, that also poses risk to the business.
The second one that you brought up is pretty relevant, especially post-COVID world. We've seen so many companies that just pretty much closed their doors because they were extremely reliant on just one vertical, maybe hospitality or some of those verticals that was extremely affected by the COVID pandemic, right? So I think that diversifying your stream of income is extremely important when it comes to making sure it is a sellable business.
Yeah, you raise a great point, right? And we see it today when we talk to companies and talk to investors. Having a revenue stream that, who would have thought about needing to have a revenue stream that could survive a pandemic, right? Talk about long tail risk. But having a business that's resilient in the face of again, these fat tail risks or long tail risks where you have to think about today, right? I think more and more investors are trying to imagine, hey, what are all the bad things that could happen to this business? And you're right. If you've got an end market that's vertically concentrated, that puts you at risk. And it's investors, they don't like risk. They want much more predictable cash flows in the future, and that's what makes for a valuable business.
Most certainly. And I think going back to your first point, which you talked about a business that's dependent heavily on their founders. So obviously anybody that's trying to build a sellable business, it really comes down to organizational systems and process. And that's essentially what it comes down to, right? So basically from your experience of working with entrepreneurs, what kind of practical advice do you have for someone who's probably needing to focus on that part of the business risk?
Yeah, again, and we're happy to help people, right, with CoPilot to help them identify, hey, what are the biggest risks that they have in their business, and how do you start to go work on those? But there's a lot of consulting organizations out there. EOS is one where it's very focused on, hey, how do I build kind of repeatable, predictable, trainable processes in my business that I can get my team to execute, and I can do that on a repeat and recurring basis. That will start to take risk out of the business. Again, getting a strong team in to help you execute on those processes, that will take risk out of the business. As we talked about, thinking about how to, as you think about your revenue streams, how do I make those revenue streams more predictable, less volatile going forward? That will add value to your business. So there's, as you said, CoPilot identifies about 90 different risk factors that can degrade value. So there's a lot that goes into kind of understanding in your own business, hey, where do I have soft spots or exposure, and what do I need to shore up? Again, there's the way, at least CoPilot does it, we try to prioritize that in terms of, hey, this is where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck to fix those risks.
So obviously, Chris, you're not just an entrepreneur, you're also an author. You've written a book called Harvest, the definitive guide to selling your business, selling your company. Essentially, you've probably learned a lot in the process of helping a lot of companies, and you said, man, it's time that I write a book. So what was kind of the turning point where you said this got to be somehow written into a book so people don't keep making some of these mistakes?
Back to our mission, right, to enable the entrepreneurial spirit. One of the things that we were learning, David and I, when we were talking to prospects is, for most business owners, they go through this process once. And so, when they showed up, they really didn't understand what they were about to go through. They didn't understand the process. They didn't understand what to watch out for. They didn't understand what to plan for. And so, we decided, hey, let's write this book so that, we can give it to business owners and they can get up to speed, in a relatively condensed, I think Harvest is 150 pages, but get up to speed in a relatively quick way, such that, they could make better decisions. And so that's why we wrote it. We had a lot of experience doing transactions and had seen, good movies and bad movies. And we just thought, hey, if we could make something available to an entrepreneur to really understand what they were up against when they decide to go market their company, we thought that would be helpful, and hopefully it has been. It's we joke that if you're having problems sleeping, Harvest is probably a pretty good tool to get you back to sleep. But it is, I think, for a lot of business owners, it just gives them a good survey of, how does valuation work? How does the transaction process work? When we talk about deal structure, what does that mean? When we talk about, private equity firms and how they manage acquisitions, what should I be concerned about? It tries to address most of those questions.
And you're giving that book away for free, even though they can buy it on Amazon.
Yeah, they can. Buy it on Amazon, but we'll send them a PDF if they want it.
So obviously there are entrepreneurs that are building lifestyle businesses and some that are growth businesses, right? And they're some people are not a big proponent of leveraging debt or borrowing money to grow their companies. But what perspective can you provide, especially some entrepreneurs maybe were raised with that mindset of, okay, I can leverage other people's money to build and grow my company?
No, it's a great question, right? And I think business owners do need to, look in the mirror and really understand, hey, what is going to make this business kind of serve me the best way possible? And for some business owners, that is a lifestyle business. Hey, I don't need to have a rapidly growing company that I'm going to sell at some point. I can have a business where I can make a good living. I can manage my time. I don't need to deal with the stresses of either raising money or trying to grow faster or hiring more people or building a team. But it's I think where business owners can get in trouble is if they're, kind of in between. They think they want something beyond a lifestyle business, but they may not be willing to make the investment of time and money and energy to build a sustainable, growing business with a deep bench and a strong team. And that's why we really encourage business owners. You'll see this kind of break point about 10 million in revenues. You start to see businesses where, the owner can't do it on their own. And if that owner's not 100% committed to taking that next step and hiring a team and delegating to them and letting them execute, those businesses will struggle. And so it's we've talked to a lot of business owners, and after listening to what their goals and objectives are, we've said, look, we don't think trying to sell your company is the right strategy. There are a lot of great, really profitable $8 million companies out there that provide their owners with a fantastic living and a great occupation. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's a great question. Most business owners, I don't know that they give enough thought to.
So obviously you've helped hundreds of companies be scaled and sold, and you've seen a lot of patterns of the type of companies that actually get the most value, and some of them are you're like, I don't want to touch this. So if somebody's anticipating on starting a company or in a business and trying to figure out if my business is sellable, like what kind of business have you seen? Like this is not something that is very attractive of an industry to be in, or a business that people would want to pay money for.
Yeah, I mean the tough industries, right? Construction and contracting, unless those are done at big scale, but if it's a $10 million contracting business, those are really, really tough to sell. It's a tough industry. Margins are skinny, working capital needs are significant. And so those are pretty hard to sell. Any business that, again, is not kind of sufficient scale. So, again, something that's going to be less than 10 million in revenues, unless it's a SaaS business where they've got a pretty good growth story and good recurring revenue, those businesses are going to be tough to sell. So I think if your ultimate plan is, I want to sell this company, you're going to have to contemplate building that to scale and having a team and, kind of thinking through some of the risk factors that we've talked about already to really have a sustainable business that's going to be marketable.
So obviously, one thing we all entrepreneurs don't have enough of is the time, right? We all lack enough time for all of to do all the different things that we need to do. So I'm just curious if you have any productivity hacks to just kind of scale your time and be able to accomplish more things in your day.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got any great hacks. It just kind of comes down to, every night I think about what needs to happen the next day, kind of make my list. And, there's a phrase called, swallow the frog or eat the frog, which is, do the most difficult thing first thing in the morning, that needs to get done. And in that way, at least your day is going to feel productive. And I do think there's momentum in being productive, right? The more things that you can get done, I think the more energy that delivers to you. But it's, in terms of productivity, a lot of it just boils down to kind of core organizational skills and then thinking about what's most important, right? Hey, what is it that I absolutely need to get done to make progress and, focus on those things. The other thing I would tell you, and David and I are really, really fortunate. We have just an unbelievable team that, I know when I talk to Zach or Danny or Danielle or the rest of the team, and we say, hey, we've got to go get this done, they're going to raise their hand and they're going to go execute. And that vicariously, I guess, makes me productive to be able to rely on them to execute well.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Obviously, you are fortunately in a business where you can observe what other companies are doing right and didn't do right. But obviously, this is your second time building a company. So what advice would you give your younger self from the experience that you have today?
That's a great question. I mean, if I were giving myself the advice as a young person or a 30-year-old, number one, probably not take everything so seriously, right? It's, they call it the game of business for a reason. It's a game, right? And there are going to be days when you're winning and there are going to be days when you're not winning or losing. But it's still, keep everything in perspective. There's certainly a lot more to life than business. We all have families and relationships that you do not want to sacrifice those. And I've been very fortunate. I've got an incredible wife who's been really, really supportive and probably more supportive than she should have been, and certainly more supportive than I deserved. But I think that notion of, hey, my old mentor used to tell me, never make the highs too high and never make the lows too low. Try to stay on an even keel. And I do think that, again, there's always tomorrow and there's always going to be a challenge, and not to take it so seriously, right, that you hurt your health or put yourself in a position where you're going to damage some of those key relationships.
So if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I don't know. I've had a pretty eclectic career. I started out as an attorney, and then I was a deal guy, and then I was an operating guy, and then we started the investment bank. I think all of those experiences, one of my mentors says, what has brought you to this stage in your life has been perfect, right? It's made you what you are. And, I'm very grateful for the experiences that I've had. And some of those have been more challenging than others. But I think those experiences that are the most challenging, that's when you're learning the most, and that's when you're growing the most. And I think as a young person, sometimes it's hard to forget to understand that, right? That, hey, this is teaching me something. I'm learning something from this experience that I should be paying attention to. I tell my kids, when they've made a big mistake in their mind, hey, you just paid a big tuition. Make sure that you're getting the lesson, right? Make sure that you're learning and you're taking away from this something that's going to help you in the future. And so, again, it's easy to look back. I'm 54, so I look back and career's been, relatively successful. But I think for most people, you're going to have challenges and you're going to have times in your life which don't go the way you want them to, but make sure you're learning.
Yeah, I think it was Guy Kawasaki who said that in the real world, the smart people are the ones who make mistakes and learn and change what they have done. And in school, the smart people are the ones that never make any mistakes. so
yeah, I think that's true, right?
In real world, I guess we all make mistakes and just learn from it and never repeat that again.
Yeah, no, it's with our, the young guys that we hire, young folks that we hire, We tell them, look, we want you to break glass, right? We want you to make mistakes because that's how you're going to learn and that's how you're going to develop faster. If you have folks that are afraid to make a mistake in the organization, it's really going to stunt development and slow your own growth.
Most certainly. Well, Chris, I certainly appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your time and your wisdom with our audience. And thank you again for joining me for this episode.
Oh, thank you. Not sure how much wisdom there is, but happy to share the time. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris.
Take care.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.